When nothing works anymore with an autistic child, what finally changed for us? Hello everyone! In this video, I will quickly present, or at least remind you of, Alexandre's journey. He is my 9-year-old son who was diagnosed with ASD at the age of 3, and I'll explain what allowed for a turning point in his journey, what brought about a real change that we were able to observe, and how we saw him make progress for the first time when he was 9. Let me quickly remind you of the context. Alexandre is 9 years old today. He was diagnosed with ASD at the age of 3. I consulted every possible psychologist, psychoanalyst, neurologist, and doctor who... They all came to the same single diagnosis, ASD, which is kind of a catch-all where all children are placed, including those who are truly autistic and those who actually have trauma, a dysfunction, a delay, an electrophysiological blockage, and so on. So in this video, I'm going to tell you a bit about Alexandre's story, about children who are diagnosed as autistic but actually are not. Everything I'm going to share with you in this video is justified and based on academic scientific literature, which I have included in the description of this video. So today, and actually for many years now, it has been very difficult for psychologists and psychiatrists to distinguish between children who are structurally autistic and others who, for example, have an electrophysiological blockage, like Alexandre, my son. And I will explain to you in the rest of this video exactly why that is. So, early childhood specialists are content to clinically observe the child's symptoms. And as soon as they observe a certain number of symptoms, they simply assign a label, which is that of autism. But in reality, this is a serious scientific mistake that not only causes trauma for parents. Rest assured, I went through the same thing as you. I know what it's like. When you're told that your child is autistic, that you will only be able to compensate a little, maybe improve things slightly, it's always a cold shower. We try to find alternative solutions. I went through all the literature possible and imaginable, just as you probably did, trying to help my child. And in this long quest, the incompetence of so many specialists who simply observe a communication dysfunction and then conclude, so this is a child with autism. A delay, a language learning problem combined, let's say, with a few restricted interests, and it's automatically labeled as autism. But in reality, things are much more nuanced than that, much more complex. When you take the time to familiarize yourself even a little with the scientific literature, which unfortunately many specialists are unaware of, you find that there are different scenarios. You can have a child who has experienced trauma in childhood who will display autistic-like symptoms such as social withdrawal, lack of communication or language that does not develop or develops very little, which was the case for Alexandre and is probably the case for your child, or whose language develops poorly, with words that are inappropriate for the context or situation. Dysfunctions at the limbic level, at the behavioral level, tendencies to laugh for no reason, to cry for no reason. In short, a child who is very difficult to take out, to do activities with, to socialize. And the number of sleepless nights I've had thinking, worrying about my son's future and my own future. Because if my son's future is that of a disabled child, my future will be that of a crutch and a parent who will be forced to help him for the rest of his life. So it's a source of trauma, not only for the child, but for the parents as well. So I understand. I empathize deeply with your journey. The purpose of this video is to show you where the turning point was in Alexandre's story. And up until quite recently, since I was able to do some research on my own, with people around me, and also from what I was able to find in the literature, which is actually quite extensive on the subject, it's the impact of neuromodulation. Now, be careful. Neuromodulation is something that can greatly help an autistic child, or a child who is mistakenly considered autistic but categorized as such, but it does not allow for a complete cure. So if your child is truly structurally autistic, you will have the possibility of seeing a major improvement of about 20 to 30% by significantly improving many symptoms. For example, emotional regulation can be impacted. A complete reversal of the problem. So this is really the disclaimer I want to make in this video. When a child is truly structurally autistic, we cannot expect a full recovery. On the other hand, if the disorder is really functional, which is the case for a very, very large number of children, and perhaps for your child as well, and paradoxically, with neuromodulation, provided it is carried out over the long term, over many months, which as of today is not implemented by clinics, nor is it practically put into place by parents in the field, because neuromodulation is considered to be experimental. This is absolutely false, since there are now more than 5,000 scientific articles in the literature on neuromodulation and its very significant impact on cognitive functioning. And the electroencephalogram is the foundation that allows you to actually observe a potential for improvement when considered alongside the child's clinical history. In Alexandre's case, he had a very pronounced history of trauma from ages 0 to 3, which is also the case for many other children. It is enough for the mother to have been less present during the first years of life. This is the psychoanalytic theory. Or for the child who have been exposed to traumatic events in early childhood. And this can generate, or does generate, according to the scientific literature, and you'll find the links in the description of this video, electrophysiological dysfunctions that can literally block your child's development. And you find yourself at the age of 3, 4, 5, and so on, with a brain that is blocked. You go to see your psychologist, your psychoanalyst, your doctor, who will diagnose autism, when in reality it is an electrophysiological lock that very few specialists today are actually able to detect. Because they don't have sufficient knowledge of the literature, because they observe changes after just a few neuromodulation sessions. Whereas in reality, a much more extensive and significant intervention is needed to truly unlock your child. The autistic stereotypes have completely disappeared. The auditory hypersensitivity has completely disappeared, but it disappeared completely after just 1 week of neuromodulation. Alex sleeps well at night. We have a child who is much more capable from a cognitive standpoint. So he works with an educator to try to make the most of the induced plasticity through neuromodulation. And he is much more effective cognitively. Eye contact has improved by at least 50%. I will share in other videos the progress that is reported week after week by the educator. So we have eye contact that has completely changed, we have stereotypes that have completely disappeared, we have a child who is calm, who is attentive, and we have auditory hypersensitivity. If you have a child with ASD, your child probably often does this as soon as there's a little bit of noise. I think you will recognize that this hypersensitivity has completely disappeared. Listen to me carefully after just 1 week of neuromodulation. Today, Alexandre is able to listen to music at 100 decibels, like in a nightclub, without showing any signs of hypersensitivity, which in itself is already revolutionary for us. Tactile hypersensitivity, Alexandre had very significant tactile hypersensitivity. It completely disappeared within a week. This just goes to show you the revolutionary impact that neuromodulation can have, or at the very least, a very significant improvement for your child. And it's much better than what you can achieve with compensatory strategies like therapy. ABA, which greatly disappointed me. Not that I'm saying it's ineffective in my particular case. Once again, I'm referring to my own situation, but it will of course help the child through conditioning mechanisms. But it doesn't address the root of the problem, which is really an issue with the brain's structural functioning, if your child is truly autistic, or if the issue is electrophysiological, if your child has an electrophysiological problem, because they experienced trauma in early childhood, because they didn't receive enough stimulation or suffered from emotional deprivation, etc. These are causes that can lead to this type of problem, which will result in your child being diagnosed with ASD, even though they are not actually autistic. There you have it. I hope this video will provide you with some useful information. Very useful, since your child's autism is something extremely serious. And you must do everything you can to speed things up and take advantage of your child's windows of plasticity, which close as your child develops. And I encourage you to learn more about this issue if you are not convinced by this sharing, by the testimonies I'm giving you. But I encourage you to look into the subject, to read the scientific literature on it, because it is probably a window that is not being utilized very widely, underutilized around the world. And I encourage you to educate yourself, to gather information on the subject.